Welcome to what could be my new studio. In this series, I'm going to be documenting the trials and tribulations and the pitfalls of setting up a full-time mixing and mastering studio in a flat in a metropolitan in London. In this video in particular, we're going to be talking about the concept, what I'm planning on doing with the flat and the research that I've done to suggest that this may be a feasible project. Join me on this journey as we find out whether I can make a flat in London work to be a full-time mixing and mastering studio. Hi, I'm Ed Thorne. It's good to see you. Now, if you've followed this channel for a while, you'll be familiar with the background of my old studio with the multiple sets of speakers, the big desk, the dark blue walls, and you probably can't see it, but there was a very low ceiling in that room. And if you've followed the channel for a while as well, you'll have also seen me documenting my rabbit hole into room acoustics and acoustic treatment and speaker design in an effort to try and get the best mix and mastering translation I can achieve. The room acoustic issues were annoying, and there were loads of drums in the room, you know, round things designed to resonate, not ideal for mixing. But I did what I could, and ultimately, as you may have seen as well, I ended up doing a lot of mixing on headphones to mitigate the low end problem. And I'm fine with doing that and continuing with doing that. So there were three solutions, three options. One, I stay where I am, which is perfectly fine. I can play drums there, I can sing, I can mix and not bother anyone. The second option was a facility in West London, not too far from my house, where there's a whole bunch of producers and mix engineers and established industry professionals, which would have created a very good networking opportunity. However, those rooms were going for about £1,650 a month, which is a lot of money, and I definitely can't justify that. The third option, we are in. This is my spare bedroom in my flat. Now, this poses several problems we're going to dive into in this video, but I wanted to explore the concept of turning this into a studio for maximum convenience. Now, there are pros to having another studio off-site, such as I'm not bothering my neighbours if I play drums. The walk there and back is about half an hour each way, which is good physically and for one's mental health. I'm not going to have that here, but I will have unlimited time here, 7 days a week access, and I can schedule it however I like. Now, moving into this room, potentially, I'm not under the illusion that I'm going to be able to play drums here. I'm probably not even going to attempt putting a subwoofer in here, and there are various problems and concerns we'll talk about in a little while. But I'm optimistic I can make this into a good space, and I have been doing some precursory research as to the feasibility of whether this room could potentially sound good, or at least better than the last room. The last room had modal issues and a huge null at 95 Hertz, which was pretty bad, mitigating it as much as I could with speaker placement, which was limited by that huge desk I had. That was a bit of an error buying that. The lowest I could get the null at 95 Hertz was minus 14 dB in one speaker and minus 8 in another. It was really weird how there was such a disparity between the two, but that was what I could do, and Trinov can do heavy lifting to about 10 decibels, and then it starts sounding strange. That was the best I could get in that room, hence the move to headphones. Now, we'll talk about budget later on in this video. I'll give you an estimate of the expenses I'm expecting to pay for this move in here. And then in the final video, because this is going to be a video series documenting how I'm doing the build, what I'm doing, what the measurements are, how the measurements are changing when I'm bringing in room treatment and so forth. So I'll give you a final budget at the end of the series, but at the end of this video, I'll give you a rough estimate of what I'm expecting to spend, and we'll see if they line up. But first of all, let me show you the initial acoustic research that I did to see whether this was feasible as a room or not. I am on the AMROC website, which is the room mode calculator website. This is free to use and a very good resource for assessing the feasibility of your studio. So we're going to set up a new box-shaped room profile, of which this is. The length is 420 centimeters. The width is 260, and the height is 275. Now, what this is showing us is several things, but the first thing that's looking like it's good news so far is this Bonello scale here, for which that is displaying the modal content in the room, which represents an even distribution of modes up the frequency range. So this reading already is actually quite good. We can then go through it and highlight different frequencies. And down here in the room 3D section, it will show us the pressure areas in the room where the high pressure zones are going to be at different frequencies. And what this is going to communicate to us is what frequencies are likely to be an issue and cause high and low pressure zones, and where we need to put a treatment potentially according to the frequency. So 62, top and bottom of the room, 66, all down the side walls by the looks of it, 74 in the top and bottom wall to floor and wall to ceiling corners, the vertical corners. Now this is where it gets interesting, because we can hear at 81.6 hertz in the middle of the room there's going to be a pressure point. So this is going to help me choose where I put my listening position. 50% in the middle of the room is generally regarded a big no-no. 33 to 38% seems to be the sweet spot, but theory is not always accurate in reality. This is giving us an idea of where we can be positioning ourselves in the room. The second thing I use to test the feasibility of the studio is Room EQ Wizard. This is a free software to download. It's not a particularly attractive software, but it does the job. And there is a room simulation part of this, where again, you type in your room measurements, but basically you can move your speakers around, and the frequency wave response you will see on the screen is going to move, as you can see, as and when I move the speakers around. And that's going to give us an idea of where, in theory, we can position our speakers and listening position for the flattest frequency response with the minimal modal issues. This is also massively affected by how high you sit in the room. Now, if you look here, in an ideal world, the lower I go, the better the frequency response is, in terms of, it can get it to be a little bit flatter. But I'm obviously not going to be sitting at 72 centimeters above the floor or on the floor, so I need to be realistic. Likely I'm going to be sat at about 1 meter 10. Let's try 1 meter. Moving the speakers at about 1 meter inside and out. And you can see where, if I go there, there's a big null at about 200. So I want to avoid any nulling. Remember, with room acoustics and frequency issues, it is a lot easier to EQ out a peak where the frequencies are building up in the room than it is to put frequencies into a null. Because if you have a null at 100 hertz, that's where those sound waves are cancelling each other. You can't just fill that with more 100 hertz, because that's just going to cancel itself out even more. So that frequency will never exist if there's a complete null. Speaker positioning can help this, like it did in my old room, but we want to try to avoid this as much as we can now. Next thing we can do is vary how far away from the back wall the speakers are. Again, this isn't taken into account speaker design, because every speaker, whether it be a sealed enclosure, a front ported speaker, a rear ported speaker, a speaker with passive radiators like my Amphions, or cardioid arrays like the Keys and Dutch and Dutches, they're all going to react and interact with the room differently. But this is just a guide of where you can roughly put things, in theory, should sound best. Now, also in theory, this isn't taking into account the materials the walls are made of. For example, this wall is a solid brick wall behind a layer of plasterboard. There's about an inch gap. That wall is plasterboard, and some of it is hollow, which is a job I'm going to fill in. We'll talk about that later. And there's a window at the back, and behind me there's a fireplace, chimney stack, sorry, which I'm going to have to plug. And half of that wall is stone and half of that wall is plasterboard. Again, the cavity needs filling with rock wool. So this isn't taking into account any of this. So where I have that now, the frequency response is reasonably flat. It's certainly about as flat as I can get it in theory on this calculator. Now, if we're measuring the room at 85 dB, the worst null there is, what, 8 decibels at about 57 hertz. That's not the end of the world. There's peaks that we can EQ out. It's a lot easier to EQ out a peak than it is to fill in a null. But you'll notice something What I've done here is I've left my listening position at 2/3 of the way back down the room. Now, most people would say go to the 38% rule, but if I move to 38%, which is there, then we have huge problems at 100 Hertz. Now, okay, if we're going at 85 dB volume, that's a 12 dB null. That's not great, but that's before treatment and before Trinov, and that's not as bad as the null I had in my previous room. So I feel like we're already winning. But I'm not against the idea of sitting, because I've got the space and it's my studio, I can do what I want with it. I'm not against the idea of sitting 2/3 of the way back down the room, which is about there, and getting, if that gives me a relatively flat frequency response, I don't mind sitting here, having the speakers on the wall and the desk in between. What we need to do then is move on to the next stage, which will be another video where I set up a speaker in the corner, play some white noise, move around, see where the peaks and nulls are, see if that correlates with this theory, and then start making a decision about a listening position. My next step was to do some acoustic measurements to measure the volume in the room and to measure the leakage outside of the room. Let me give you a quick tour of the room. So that's my sofa bed for Paul Third to stay on when he's down for Gearfest. And this is the other side of the room. There's a lovely window bay there. It's currently getting used as a washing room. But what I'm going to do is basically play my Anchor soundbar as loud as I can. And we're going to take some measurements of how loud it is in the room and outside of the room as well. And what I'll probably do for the video is slightly pitch shift this section to try and get around the copyright ID. Otherwise I'll be playing one of my own tracks and nobody wants to hear that. So at full volume, that is coming out at about 80 dB peak, which I guess is about what I'm going to be listening to. Maybe a little bit louder, but this is a benchmark we're going to start with. So let's go outside, keep the music playing, and see how it changes. So that's coming in about 50, oh, my voice has just ruined that measurement, so I can't show you, but that's coming in about 53, 54 decibels. That's a 26 decibel reduction just by the walls and the door, which I think is already pretty good, and I'm kind of surprised it's that good. But at 55, I'm wondering if they can hear it outside the flat. So let's have a look. And we'll play again. So that's coming in less than 40 decibels, which is actually better on this than I measured on my phone, which means one of them's wrong, and I can't tell you which one I trust more. This is old, phone speakers are small, but the reduction's quite a lot. Now I'm going to go downstairs into the foyer and see how much sound is going down through the flat and transferring through the building. So that is the studio above there. So it's about 58 decibels. It'd be nice to knock about 8 dB off that somehow. Let's go outside. So you can hear that train going past. That's louder than anything I'm hearing. So as you heard, it's actually louder outside, but obviously this is picking up all the ambient noise as well, which kind of mitigates the whole problem. But there is a bit of top end escaping, which is audible, and you can clearly hear music, which I'm afraid if my neighbours have windows open, they'll be able to hear. But I have a solution for that. And you can see the bottom of the fireplace, which links up to the room as well. Now I did a further test and I went into my neighbour's flats. There's a neighbour on this floor and there's a neighbour downstairs down there, and there's a neighbour at the back. And I went into those two back flats, and at this level, at 80 to 82 dB in the room, you can't hear anything in those two flats. So this is already good as far as I'm concerned. But I've identified a couple of weaknesses in the walls that I am going to address and hopefully make that even better. Now the weaknesses are as follows. In the wall here, you can see, this is where it goes from solid brick to plasterboard walls. And this being an old conversion, this was done over 30 years ago. The building regulations weren't very good. And actually this is hollow. I had to drill a hole. Curiosity got the better of me. I drilled a hole and there's no rock wool in between these layers. So instead of taking off the whole panel, what I want to do is just cut holes in about letterbox shape, bit bigger than letterbox shape, stick rock wool in, and then stick these panels back in, glue them up with acoustic sealant, and then smoothen them over. And because I'm going to put paneling on there, I'm not bothered about replastering or making it look good. And when I move house, or if I rent this out in the future, I'll deal with that then. It's a future me problem. There is also another spot in the wall which I think is interesting. That bit there, this has all been pretty well done as far as it sounds like there's rock wool in there, but there used to be a doorway there and you can see the frame, certainly on the other side, it's a bit easier to see where the frame of the doorway was, and they've just not bothered putting rock wool in there for reasons I don't understand, so I need to do the same thing there as well. And there's another problem, which is the radiator. Now, the expense of me basically removing this is just not an option. I also need it for when I vacate this room as a studio, but I am wondering how much it's going to resonate. So I need to think about that moving forward. There's also things like where the pipes go into the ground there, into the floor. That's basically going underneath the floorboards. So sound is going to get down there. So I'm going to get some acoustic sealant and seal all around those edges. I don't know what it'll do, whether it'll do much, but it'll at least satisfy my curiosity. Now at this juncture, I'm assuming someone has already nailed me in the comments for this, because that's what the internet's good for. And they're going to point out that these speakers, although they might be able to achieve 80 to 82 decibels, they're not creating high sound pressure levels because they're not physically moving lots of air. And this is a good consideration. And as I've done this, I'm realizing I should have got some speakers out of the studio. But like I said, this is just an initial test, and I think the results are enough that it will mitigate the extra SPL created by bigger drivers. But there's also reaffirms, or I'm optimistic at least, that my Amphions with a 5.5-inch woofer are still the right speaker for this room. The problems I had in the old studio with the big 23-inch PSI woofers and the Ex Machina woofers was they just created so much sound pressure in the low end that was then causing a lot of the nulling at 95 hertz. As I documented in my Amphion speaker review, the Amphions mitigate a lot of the room acoustic issues, and part of that is just because they're not physically creating all of that low end energy and pressure in the room. So I'm confident the Amphions are still the right speaker. So what are the things to consider in this flat? If you're doing something similar or considering a home studio, or you have a home studio, let me know what the problems were in the comments. But now I'm going to walk you through what I think the main concerns of this room are. Obviously it's a flat, noise is going to transfer. There's another side of the semi-detached house over there. Noise goes through that wall into my lounge, not bothered about that, nobody's going to be in there. Underneath me is the foyer, the entranceway to the building, not a problem, nobody's living there. As we've ascertained, noise isn't going into the other flats, so that is a good result and encouraging already. I haven't asked the neighbours on that side if there's any noise transference, but I've been in here for 6 months. I've never heard anything from that side of the building, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. What might be an issue is the window. Now the window, as you can see, is currently single glazing. I'm trying to get new windows put in, but I need planning permission. Unsurprisingly, that's taking ages. That's an infuriating process. So my plan is to block the window. What I learned in my old flat, when I had my old bedroom studio right at the beginning of my YouTube journey, for anyone who's seen the first videos I did, pretty terrible, but acoustically that room was better than my studio. My studio was so isolating, it kept all the frequencies in the room, all the sound pressure in the room. In the old flat, I had a great big window behind me, and I had no low end problems because all the bass was escaping out of the double glazed windows, but not enough noise was escaping to annoy the neighbours. This is single glazed windows, and you can hear the music quite audibly outside, as you heard earlier. So my plan for now, until I can get double glazing, which may or may not help, is to build a great big plug. So the plan is basically to plug this window frame with some plyboard sandwiched with rock wool in, maybe some tech sound as well, wrap it in a great big moving blanket. So basically I can put it in and move it out and plug it as and when I need to. So when I'm mixing on speakers, I plug it. When I'm mixing on headphones and I want some fresh air, I can take it down and open the windows. The next part is the door, which is interesting. The door's reasonable quality, but obviously there are holes at the seams and at the bottom as well. So my plan for this is to put tech sound on the door and overlapping over the frame to try and create some kind of seal to minimize what's going through. Tech sound is mass loaded vinyl. It's incredibly heavy stuff, but the door can hold my entire body weight. So I'm optimistic it can hold that. And that will help just mitigate what's going through the door. And I've got seals for the frames as well, coming of different types from Amazon, and some seal at the bottom as well. The next interesting thing is there's a chimney stack, which just while I'm thinking about it, I just want to test something. So it sounds like where the fireplace would have been, it's actually been blocked up to a reasonable extent. But as you look at the top up there with my yoga blocks, they are blocking a vent which goes directly into the chimney, and that then goes all the way up to the building, top of the building, and all the way down into the foyer, into the entranceway. So I'm going to block that with foam, cover the entrance with tech sound as well, put the panel, put the vent back on, and then probably cover that with some kind of acoustic paneling anyway, again to mitigate what is going out into the rest of the building. Now, for those of you who know even a little bit about soundproofing and acoustics, you'll know that it's basically a case of all or nothing. I considered building a room within a room, but I was told I would need to lose at least 12 centimeters or 5-6 inches off each wall, which makes the room quite small. A room within a room is a lot more permanent than what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do minimal permanent work so I can remove all this, take it away for several reasons. One, if I get a complaint and this doesn't work out, then I need to be able to vacate it. And this is definitely the cheapest way of doing it. Building a room within a room was going to cost about £7,000 in materials, plus labor, plus time. If I was going to do it myself, for example, I'd have wanted to pay someone because I can do DIY, but I'm not good at it and I'm not quick at it. So I'd rather just get somebody else to do it properly and better than I can. And also in terms of putting stuff on the walls, you know, you're physically reducing the size, the floor, the surface area of your flat, therefore reducing the value of your property, which I don't want to do. So for now, the best thing I think to do is to do this as cheaply as possible, which I'm going to try and do. Now, what I've done to do that is I've bought some gym matting flooring just to isolate the floor slightly and soften the downward transference of sound. I've got some IKEA rugs I'm going to put on the floor. I've bought a load of secondhand GIK acoustic paneling off Reverb. I bought some tech sound for the wall, some rock wool to fill in these two bits of plasterboard, and a few other bits. Oh, and a new desk as well that I found because my Zawar desk is far too big. So I have a smaller desk. And so far I have spent a total of £2,750, I think, on all of the above. And I'll give you a final cost further down the line. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you think this is a good idea, or is it career suicide? Or let me know about your builds, what's been beneficial for you, or what questions do you have regarding building a studio in your flat or in your home. I've been Ed Thorne. Thanks for watching. Wish me luck.